Owen Hartley did not walk into the 32nd floor corner office looking for a fight. He was summoned. The check was already on the glass table when he arrived. $2 million. His name printed in clean black ink, and Diana Voss sat across from him with the eyes of a woman who had won every negotiation she had ever entered in 20 years. She said, "Sign that. And everything ends right here." Owen looked at the check. Then he looked at her. Then he reached out, with one finger, slow and deliberate, and slid it back across the glass toward her, and said 3 words. Those 3 words were not a refusal. They were a verdict. And Diana Voss did not yet know that. Owen arrived at the Meridian Biotech building at 5:45 on a Tuesday morning, the same as every other morning for the past 14 months. He parked his 2014 Honda Civic in spot 47 on level B3, the one closest to the east concrete column, and he sat behind the wheel for 30 seconds before getting out. That was a habit he had developed after Lily started asking why he left so early. He never had a good answer, so he gave himself 30 seconds to find one before the day started. He was the only person in the records department who arrived before 6. His colleagues called him the librarian, which was not entirely wrong. He managed physical documentation for research projects dating back 12 years, thousands of archival boxes stacked floor to ceiling across a climate-controlled room that most people in the building had never visited. His badge said Records Coordination Specialist, Level 2. His shoes were black leather, worn at the heels. His flannel shirt was navy blue and clean. Nobody asked how a man with a master's degree in accounting from Northwestern ended up cataloging paper files in a basement. In the beginning, he had expected someone would. The HR manager who processed his onboarding had looked at his resume for a long moment before setting it down without comment. His direct supervisor, a well-meaning man named Dennis, who managed the department from a standing desk and spoke extensively about workflow efficiency, had once said he was glad to have someone with Owen's kind of focus on the team, which Owen took as the closest anyone would come to acknowledging the obvious mismatch. After that, no one said anything. People were accustomed, in workplaces like this one, to not asking questions whose answers might be uncomfortable to hold. He kept a photograph of his wife in his wallet, tucked behind his insurance card. Clara Hartley. She had been 33 years old when she died in February of the previous year, sudden cardiac complications, the hospital said. 6 months into a prescription for Verilin, a cardiac support medication manufactured by Meridian Biotech, the same company whose basement Owen now spent his days inside. He had never told anyone at Meridian that. He had applied for the job 6 weeks after her funeral, and when HR processed his file, no one connected the name. He had not corrected them. That morning, before he left the apartment, Lily had come downstairs in her pajamas, Biscuit tucked under one arm. Biscuit was a small, gray stuffed rabbit, missing one button eye, that Lily had carried everywhere since she was 2. She set him on the kitchen table and climbed into her chair. "Dad," she said, "what is Verilin?" Owen turned from the stove. "Where did you hear that word?" Lily pointed to the kitchen drawer. "There's a paper in there. It has a picture of a heart and a big word." Owen opened the drawer. A folded medication information pamphlet, Clara's, from the pharmacy. He had not cleaned out all of those drawers yet. He looked at the pamphlet for a moment, then folded it again and put it in his back pocket. "It's medicine the doctors give people," he said. Lily looked at him with the particular expression she wore when she was deciding whether to believe him. She had her mother's eyes brown, direct, unhurried. Then she picked up Biscuit and began eating her oatmeal, and Owen drove her to school and went to work, and the pamphlet in his pocket felt like it weighed something it should not have. He was at his desk at 6:13 when Grace Holloway knocked on the doorframe. Grace was 63 years old and had worked in Meridian's archival department for 14 years. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and brought chamomile tea in a thermos every morning. She was not the kind of person who looked alarmed. She looked alarmed now. She carried a gray archival box and set it on the edge of Owen's desk without putting it down fully, as though she had not yet decided whether to leave it there. "I can't find a home for this," she said. Verilyn Phase. 3 internal review documents, batches 7 through 10. The destruction order was issued in 2019, but I cannot find the authorization signature anywhere. I've looked 3 times. The order exists. The signature does not. Owen looked at the box. "Who issued the destruction order?" he asked. Grace glanced toward the hallway and back. "It came from 32, she said. "That's all I know." She straightened. "I'm going to file it as pending resolution. I just wanted you to know it was here." She left before he could ask anything else. The box sat on his desk. The word Verilyn sat in his memory next to Lily's question and Clara's pamphlet. He should have put the box on the pending shelf and walked away. Instead, he opened it. What Owen Hartley found inside the gray archival box was not dramatic to look at. It was 4 bound document sets, each hand-labeled in blue ink internal review materials from the Verilyn Phase 3 clinical trial, covering patient batches 7 through 10 from the years 2016 through 2018. The same trial that had produced the FDA-approved safety data for a drug now prescribed to hundreds of thousands of people. Owen was not a records clerk at heart. He was a forensic accountant, on leave from himself. 5 years of reading financial statements for fraud had trained his eye to skip past the surface of any document and land directly on the numbers that didn't add up. He flipped to the summary tables in the first binder and started reading. It took him 11 minutes to find the first discrepancy. 22 more minutes to confirm it was not a clerical error. The internal review materials documented 31 serious adverse cardiac events within the 412-patient trial cohort over the first 12 months of observation. 31. The official FDA submission report for the same trial, which Owen pulled from the Digital Compliance Archive on his workstation, listed 9. 22 adverse events, more than half had been removed from the regulatory filing. He went back through the internal documents line by line. Each of the 22 removed entries carried a notation in the margin. Not a standard medical code. A handwritten abbreviation. NR non. Reportable. Per Directive 12. B. Owen searched the entire compliance manual for Directive 12B. It did not exist. He searched the company's internal regulatory policy archive. It did not exist there either. It was a code that had been invented to make people disappear from a document. He spent another 40 minutes cross-referencing the batch numbers against the manufacturing and distribution logs he could access through his archival credentials. What he found confirmed the timeline. The internal review documenting 31 adverse events had been completed in September of 2018. The FDA submission report listing 9 had been finalized and filed 4 months later, in January of 2019. Someone had spent those 4 months deciding which 22 people to erase. They had given that decision a code name so it would look like policy. They had filed the result with the federal government, and Verilyn had received its full approval and gone to market. He turned to the demographic classification tables, the breakdown of each adverse event patient by age, sex, date of complication, and geographic region. He was looking for patterns. He found something else. Row 17 in the removed list. Female. 31 years of age. Cardiovascular event. Month 7 of treatment. Boston metropolitan area. No name. Only a patient code. But the month, the year, the age, the city, and the type of event aligned with everything Owen knew about the last 6 months of Clara's life, with a precision that left no room for coincidence. He sat still for 30 seconds. He did not move. The climate-controlled air in the basement room was the same temperature it always was. The fluorescent light above his desk hummed at its usual frequency. Everything around him was exactly the same as it had been an hour ago. And something central to how Owen understood the past 14 months had just changed permanently. He did not slam his hand on the desk. He did not call anyone. He stood up, locked the door to the records room, sat back down, and read the entire set of documents again from the beginning, this time with a pencil and a blank sheet of paper. 5 years of forensic work had taught him one rule above all others. Do not trust your first reaction. Read again. Verify. Then act. By 7:30 that evening, the building was nearly empty. Owen had filled 4 pages of notes. He took out his personal cell phone, switched off the wireless connection, and photographed 94 pages of documents using only the camera. He placed the phone in the interior pocket of his jacket, returned the archival box to the pending shelf, exactly as Grace had described it, turned off the lights, and walked to the elevator. In the B3 parking level, as he crossed toward spot 47, he noticed something. A camera mounted at the northeast corner of the ceiling, compact, dark housing, a slightly different angle than the older units. He had worked in this building for 14 months and had never seen that camera before. He noted it and did not slow his pace. That night, after Lily was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table and opened his laptop. He searched the FDA's MedWatch reporting system. He searched the agency's Office of Criminal Investigations. He read the full procedural guidelines for protected whistleblower submissions under federal pharmaceutical law. Then he searched for a name. Logan Shaw, Special Agent, FDA Office of Criminal Investigations, Boston Field Office. He found a contact address. He wrote nothing that night. He closed the laptop, washed the dishes, and stood at the kitchen window for a long time, looking at nothing in particular. On the refrigerator behind him, held up by a magnet Lily had painted at school, was a photograph of Clara. Not a posed one, someone had taken it at a backyard gathering. And Clara had looked up at the wrong moment and been caught mid-laugh. Eyes bright. Entirely herself. Owen looked at it for a while. Then he went to bed. Diana Voss ended her board meeting at 9:14 that same evening. The quarterly results had come in 18% above projection. Verilyn represented 40% of company revenue and was on track to become the top-selling cardiac support drug in the northeastern region within 2 years. She had built Meridian Biotech from a leased laboratory space in New Jersey 18 years ago. She had done it without a partner, without inherited capital, and without asking anyone for permission. The results on the slide behind her were the product of that. Marcus Pryor knocked after the last board member left. He was 41 years old and had been Meridian's chief legal counsel for 6 years. He was the kind of lawyer who never raised his voice because he never needed to. He set a tablet on Diana's desk without speaking. The screen showed security camera footage from the B3 level, time-stamped from earlier that evening. A man in a navy flannel shirt standing in front of the Verilyn Phase 3 storage section. The camera was the one Diana had authorized installation of 3 weeks earlier as part of a broader archival security review. The motion-sensitive AI flagged irregular dwell time in sensitive storage zones. He was there 22 minutes, Marcus said. The jacket pocket profile suggests a handheld device. He did not connect to any building network. We cannot confirm what was captured. Diana picked up the tablet and looked at the footage. Then she set it down and opened the personnel file Marcus had already pulled. Owen Hartley, 35. Records Coordination Specialist. Former forensic accountant. Wife deceased, February of the previous year. Daughter, 6 years old. Diana was quiet for a moment. Then, his wife. She died in February. Yes. What was the cause? Cardiac event. She was a Verilyn patient. The room was silent. Diana set the personnel file down with the same measured movement she used for everything. Get me a full read on him by 7 tomorrow morning, she said. And Marcus, when we approach this, I want him to feel respected. Not pressured. Understood? Marcus understood. The following morning, before Owen drove Lily to school, she climbed into the front seat and sat Biscuit on the dashboard. "You made pancakes," she said. "I did. You only make pancakes when you're sad." Owen looked at her. "This time I made them because I'm getting ready to do something." Lily considered this with the seriousness she applied to most things. "Something good? Something right?" He put the car in reverse. "That's a different thing, but it's a good one." Lily accepted this and ate her pancake from the wrapped piece of foil he had prepared for the car, which was a thing Clara had used to do on mornings when they were running late. Lily had started requesting it, and Owen had never stopped. He dropped her at school, watched her walk through the front door with Biscuit visible from outside through the glass. And then he drove to the public library 2 miles away. He used a computer at a public terminal. He opened a browser in private mode. He completed the FDA-protected disclosure intake form and attached the 94 photographs from his personal phone, uploaded via a personal encrypted cloud account he had created the night before. He included a 6-page written analysis he had drafted by hand and typed that morning, cross-referencing the internal review data against the FDA submission records, annotating each discrepancy with document references and page numbers. On the final page, under additional context, he wrote one sentence about patient code VLN P3 B9 017. He also sent a direct email to Logan Shaw. The email was 3 lines. He did not use his real name in the body. He identified himself by the case reference number the submission system had assigned. He stated that he was an employee of Meridian Biotech with direct access to the source documents, that the submission was genuine, and that he was available to speak in person at any time. He closed the browser, returned the computer to its idle state, and drove to work. When he arrived at Meridian, Grace's desk was empty. He called her cell phone and reached voicemail. He sent a text message. No response. At 11 o'clock, a building security officer appeared at the entrance to the records department and informed Owen that Grace Holloway had been placed on extended personal leave effective that morning at the request of Human Resources. Owen thanked him, said nothing else, and returned to his cataloging work. He stayed the full day. He filed 5 archival requests, processed 2 document destruction authorizations, each one with a complete and traceable paper trail, answered 4 interdepartmental emails, and clocked out at 5:47. If anyone was watching his behavior for signs of stress, they saw nothing useful. At 4:45, 10 minutes before he left, his workstation received an email from the executive assistant on the 32nd floor. "Miss, Voss would like to meet with you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. 32nd floor. This is a private meeting, and there is no need to notify your supervisor." Owen read the email, printed it, folded it into quarters and put it in his pocket. That evening he picked up Lily, cooked dinner, read her 2 chapters of the book they were working through together, and waited until her breathing slowed and she was asleep. Then he sat at the kitchen table and opened his laptop. He wrote 1 line to Logan Shaw. "Meeting scheduled tomorrow, 9 a.m. I will be attending." He closed the laptop. He sat with the album he kept on the kitchen shelf. Not a digital album, an actual printed one that Clara had put together when Lily was born. There were not many photographs of Clara, because she did not like being photographed. But there was one near the back that someone had taken in the hospital room, and Clara was holding Lily and looking down at her with an expression Owen had never been able to name precisely, tired and radiant, and completely sure of something. Written in the margin in Clara's handwriting, "This one needs us." Owen looked at it for a long time. He took out a small notebook and wrote down, one by one, the patient codes from the 22 removed adverse event entries. He had memorized all of them. He wrote them down not because he needed the list, he had the photographs and the analysis already filed. He wrote them down because he wanted to look at them. He wanted to remember that tomorrow morning was not about him and Diana Voss. It was about 22 entries that someone had deleted from a regulatory document in the belief that numbers were more manageable than people. He was in bed by 10:30. Before he did, he lay in the dark for a while and thought about the word whistleblower, which he had never applied to himself, and which carried associations he was not entirely comfortable with, a heroic framing that didn't fit the way he had come to the information. He had not gone looking for this. He had opened a box because Grace had left it on his desk and because Lily had said a word at breakfast that he couldn't unhear. The box had been in a basement under a building he worked in because someone had failed to destroy it 4 years ago when they were supposed to. The sequence had been almost entirely accidental. He had only done 2 deliberate things. He had read what was in front of him with the same attention he had always brought to numbers, and then he had reported what he found to the people who were supposed to know about it. He was not certain that qualified as courage. It felt more like obligation, with nowhere to go except forward. The morning of the meeting he made pancakes again. Lily came downstairs and looked at the pan, and looked at him. "Are you doing the right thing today?" she asked. "Yes." She nodded. "Okay." She sat down and reached for the syrup. He drove her to school, kissed her forehead at the door, and watched her go inside. He watched until the glass door swung shut behind her, and the lobby swallowed her up, and there was nothing left to see. It was the thing he did every morning, stood at the curb an extra moment after she disappeared, as though checking that the world had received her properly. Clara used to do the same thing. He had teased her about it once, calling it unnecessary. She had said, "It costs nothing, and it's not unnecessary." And he had never teased her about it again. Now, he did it himself. Every morning, without fail. Then he drove to Meridian. He took the elevator to the 32nd floor at 8:52. The lobby up there was a different world from the basement marble floors. Frosted glass. The whisper of expensive ventilation. A receptionist led him not to the corner office, but to a smaller conference room on the east side of the floor. Owen noted this. A secondary conference room. Fewer cameras in the corridor. Fewer witnesses passing through. Marcus Pryor was already inside. He stood when Owen entered, offered a handshake that was polished and without warmth, poured a glass of water without being asked, and gestured to the chair across from him. He spoke for several minutes in the careful and measured language of a man who had prepared every word before arriving. He discussed industry-standard confidentiality protocols. He discussed how employees sometimes encountered sensitive research documentation without the full regulatory context needed to interpret it accurately. He expressed the company's commitment to being proactive in these situations. He did not say Owen's name. He did not use the word fraud. He did not use the word investigation. Every sentence was constructed to make the conversation feel routine. Owen listened. He nodded at the appropriate intervals. He kept his hands flat on the table and his expression open and unhurried. He had spent 5 years reading fraudulent financial statements, which meant he had spent 5 years sitting across from people who were hoping he would not notice what was right in front of him. He had learned that the person speaking most in a room was usually the person most afraid of silence. Diana Voss arrived at 9 to 7. She wore a black suit and no jewelry. Her handshake was brief and firm. She sat directly across from Owen and looked at him with the direct attention of someone who had always found other people's calculations less sophisticated than her own. She spoke for what Owen later counted as 12 sentences. She described the company's deep respect for employee integrity. She described a discretionary research security acknowledgement process that Meridian maintained for employees who had incidental contact with protected trial documentation. She described the arrangement as a standard industry practice that had been extended to others in the past. Then Marcus placed the check on the table. $2 million. Owen's full name printed in the payee line. Drawn from Meridian's Research Endowment Fund, which gave it a softer origin than the company's operational accounts. This reflects our appreciation for your cooperation with the internal security process, Diana said. It comes with a standard confidentiality agreement. You'll have 24 hours to review it with your own counsel. She pushed the check slightly toward him and waited. The room was quiet. No one moved. Owen looked at the check on the glass table in front of him, and he was aware, with perfect clarity, of everything that $2 million was meant to represent. It was meant to represent the end of something, a problem converted into a transaction, a person converted into a line item, a set of deleted patient records that would remain deleted. It was meant to represent a version of the world in which a grieving man with a small daughter and a worn-down pair of shoes accepted a number large enough to reframe his own loss as something that had been acknowledged, accounted for, and settled. It was a generous number, chosen with care. Diana Voss had not built a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. By misunderstanding what people needed to hear, in order to make a hard choice feel manageable, Owen understood the offer. He understood it the way he understood the mechanics of every financial misrepresentation he had ever reviewed in the years before he became a man who cataloged files in a basement cleanly, from the inside out, without illusion. He thought about patient code 17, female, 31, Boston Metro, month 7. He thought about Lily asking what Verilyn was, because she had found her mother's medication pamphlet in a kitchen drawer. He thought about the 22 codes he had written in his notebook the night before, and the fact that each one of those codes had been a person who went to a doctor and took a medication and trusted that the information on file with the government accurately reflected what was known about that drug. Diana was still waiting. Marcus had stopped breathing in a way that was noticeable. Owen reached out. He extended his index finger, placed it on the edge of the check, and pushed it back across the glass table toward Diana. The sound of paper on glass was the only sound in the room. Then he said, calmly and without emphasis, 3 words. I already filed. Diana did not move for a moment. Then she asked, very quietly, What did you say? I already filed. Same tone. Same volume. He said it again, with the same patience he would have used to read a document reference aloud. The meaning of those 3 words arrived in the room like cold water. Owen had submitted his documentation to the FDA whistleblower program before he walked into this building that morning. Before he came upstairs, before the check was placed on the table, the non-disclosure agreement Diana was offering had no legal reach over a protected regulatory disclosure that had already been made through official federal channels. The check could not purchase what was already beyond the room. Marcus stood. You don't understand what you've done. He stopped, because Owen looked at him with an expression that was not hostile and not defensive, and simply made the sentence unnecessary. I understand exactly, Owen said. He stood up. He did not look at the check again. He looked at Diana for a moment, one long, even look, and he said the only other thing he intended to say in that room. Patient 17 in your internal list. That was my wife. Then he walked to the door and left. In the elevator, descending alone, he placed his back against the wall of the car and looked at the ceiling. The doors closed. The floors counted down. And for the first time in 14 months, something that had been locked in the center of his chest came loose, and his eyes filled without warning. Not from grief exactly, though grief was present, but from the particular exhaustion of having carried something very heavy for a very long time and finally being allowed to put it down. By 11 o'clock that same morning, an email arrived from Logan Shaw. Active review confirmed. Do not sign anything. Do not discuss this with anyone at the company. We will be in contact within the week. 3 sentences. Sufficient. By early afternoon, Meridian's IT and legal teams had moved. Owen's archival system access was suspended under the language of an internal security audit. A separate letter arrived via courier, addressed to Owen personally. Not another non-disclosure agreement, but a formal legal notice asserting that Owen had accessed proprietary clinical documentation without authorization and reserving the company's right to pursue civil remedies. The framing had shifted from accommodation to pressure. Owen read the letter at his desk, photographed it, and forwarded the image to Logan Shaw within 4 minutes of receiving it. Then he called a number he had not dialed in 3 years. Jason Cole answered on the second ring. Jason was a lawyer Owen had known since graduate school, patient, meticulous, and one of the few people who had sat with Owen in the weeks after Clara's funeral, without trying to fill the silence with useful suggestions. He had told Owen once, without occasion, that if Owen ever needed legal support for anything serious, to call. Owen told him what had happened. Jason listened without interrupting. When Owen finished, Jason was quiet for a moment, and then said, "Do not sign a single thing they put in front of you. I'll be there tomorrow morning." That evening, Owen picked up Lily from the after-school program. She was sitting on the front steps with Biscuit on her knees, drawing something in a notebook. She looked up when he pulled in. On the drive home, she said, "Did you get fired?" Owen glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "What made you think that? You picked me up early. You never pick me up early." He laughed. It was the first real, unguarded laugh he'd had in days. And it surprised him. "I didn't get fired," he said. "But I might. Does that scare you?" Lily thought about it with the seriousness she brought to things. "We could eat more pancakes," she said finally. Owen laughed again and kept driving. The following morning, Logan Shaw called on the phone. First, direct contact. His voice was calm and professional and carried no theater. He confirmed that the submission was under active formal review by the agency. He said there were follow-up questions and asked if Owen could meet in person the following week. Owen said yes. Shaw paused before hanging up and added, without embellishment, "You did the right thing. That's not easy to do." Owen thanked him and said nothing more. 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning, 2 vehicles with federal plates pulled into the Meridian Biotech parking structure at 7:58. 4 agents from the FDA Office of Criminal Investigations, along with 2 colleagues from a federal coordinating office, entered the building with formal inspection authority and proceeded to the 32nd floor. A second team went directly to the archival department in the basement. They carried a formal administrative order and a list of documentation requests that had been prepared using the reference numbers Owen had included in his original submission. Owen was not there. It was a Saturday morning in his memory when he heard the details later. But the raid itself was a Tuesday, and he was at work for a different company by then, having submitted his own resignation from Meridian 1 week after the 32nd floor meeting. He had cleared his desk himself, a framed photograph, a thermal mug, and a notebook, and taken the elevator down to B3 one final time, and driven out of spot 47 without ceremony. Grace Holloway's phone rang 2 weeks after Owen's resignation. He had not expected to hear from her. She sounded tired but composed and told him she was staying with her sister in Portland for a while. She did not explain why she had stayed quiet, and Owen did not ask. Before she hung up, she said, "I put that box exactly where it needed to be. I just couldn't be the one to open it." Owen told her he understood. He did. A postcard arrived at his apartment 10 days after that call. No return address. Portland postmark. 1 line. In handwriting he recognized from 14 months of shared work. "I placed the box in the right spot. G." He kept the postcard in the kitchen drawer next to Clara's medication pamphlet. The FDA investigation became public 6 weeks after the initial inspection. The agency issued a formal statement citing an ongoing review of the Verilyn Phase 3 trial submission for potential data irregularities. Meridian Biotech's corporate communications released a statement confirming full cooperation with regulatory authorities. The company's stock dropped 31% over 4 trading days. Diana Voss's name appeared in the agency's public notice, listed among the individuals whose conduct was under review. Owen read the coverage on his phone while sitting on a bench outside Lily's school on a Friday afternoon. He had arrived early to pick her up. The notification came while he was waiting, and he sat with it for a moment, the strange flatness of seeing something you had carried privately for months reduced to a press release and a stock chart. Other people on the bench were also looking at their phones. A woman 2 seats down was watching a video. A man in a delivery uniform was reading something and frowning. The world had received the news and was processing it in the way the world processed most news, absorbing it briefly, redistributing it widely, and moving on. The 22 names behind the story were not in the press release. They never were in these situations. That was something Owen had not known how to predict and could not change. There was no feeling of triumph. There was something that might have been described as a large, quiet settling, the way the air feels after a long tension finally releases. He put his phone in his pocket and watched the school entrance. He had encountered Diana Voss once more, between the 32nd floor meeting and the day the investigation became public. It was in the B3 parking level, unplanned. She was walking toward the elevator, and he was walking toward the exit. They both slowed without stopping. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, in a register that was not quite the voice she used in conference rooms, "Do you think this changes anything?" Owen considered it honestly. "It can't change what already happened," he said. "But it can change what happens next." Diana was quiet. Then she nodded, not in agreement exactly, but in acknowledgement. The nod of someone absorbing information they had no immediate use for. Then she walked to the elevator, and he walked to his car. And that was the last time he saw her. The family court paperwork for Clara's death had long been resolved. There was no additional legal action Owen could take that would return anything. He knew that, and had made his peace with a version of it. What the investigation could do, and what it would do, Logan Shaw told him plainly in their second meeting, was force a re-examination of every adverse event that had been stripped from the regulatory record, open the possibility of compensatory review for affected patients and their families, and change the safety labeling on a drug that was still being prescribed. That was what could happen next. It was not a monument. It was not a headline that made anything whole, but it was real. And it was forward-facing, and Owen had decided somewhere between the public library computer terminal and the kitchen table the night before the meeting that real and forward-facing was the only currency that actually spent. On the evening after the news became public, Lily came and sat on the couch next to him. She did not know the details. He had kept the language simple and age-appropriate, telling her only that something unfair had happened to her mother's medicine, and that Owen had told the people in charge so they could fix it. Lily had thought about this for a day, and then seemed to file it somewhere that made sense to her. That evening she climbed onto the cushion beside him and leaned against his arm with Biscuit tucked between them. "Dad," she said, "does Mom know you did that?" Owen looked at the ceiling for a moment. "I think she knew I would. Before I did, Lily considered this." "That's good," she said, with the tone of someone rendering a verdict that did not require debate. She pulled Biscuit further up between them. "Biscuit wants to watch something." Owen put his arm around her and found something on the television that Biscuit would probably enjoy. And they sat like that for a long time in the quiet apartment, while outside the city carried on at its usual pace. The job offer came through Jason, who had mentioned Owen's background to a colleague at an independent healthcare compliance firm. They needed someone who understood the gap between what regulatory filings said and what source documentation showed. Someone who could read what was not written. The position was formal, well compensated, and meaningful in the specific way that Owen needed meaning to work. Not abstract, not decorative, but applied. He sat at the kitchen table on a Sunday evening and read the offer letter while Lily drew at the other end of the table, tongue slightly out, Biscuit propped against her water glass as an audience. The B3 parking lot, the gray archival box, the glass conference table on the 32nd floor, none of it was behind him in the way people meant when they said something was behind you. Clara was not behind him. The 22 codes in his notebook were not behind him, but they had been set down, properly, in the place they needed to go. He did not know exactly what would happen to Diana Voss, or to Meridian Biotech, or to the other families whose names might eventually surface from the records now under federal review. The investigation was a process, not a resolution. Processes took time and produced partial outcomes, and contained disappointments that could not be predicted from the outside. He accepted that. He had learned, in the 14 months between Clara's death and the morning he opened that archival box, that acceptance was not the same as indifference. He still thought about the day she died. He still kept her handwriting on the refrigerator. He still sometimes bought the brand of tea she liked, and then stood in the kitchen, holding it, and put it back. Acceptance was what allowed him to do all of that without breaking, not what made those things stop mattering. He had also learned, and this was newer knowledge, still finding its weight, that there was a difference between grief that had a direction and grief that did not. For 14 months, what he felt about Clara's death had been grief without direction, which is the hardest kind. It had no target, no process, no question that could be answered or form that could be filed. It simply existed, large and motionless, in the space where she used to be. What the archival box had given him, if it had given him anything, was a direction. Not a cure, and not a conclusion. A direction. The kind that let you take the next step, and the one after that. What he knew was simpler and, in the end, more durable. When Lily was old enough to ask the full question not just what Verilyn was, but what had happened, and why, and what her father had done about it, there would be a true answer. Not a comfortable one, and not a complete one, because no true answer about loss was ever either of those things. But a true one. And the true answer would include the part where a woman set a $2 million check on a glass table, and Owen slid it back with one finger, and said 3 words. That was enough. That would always be enough.